A single candle trembles beside a narrow window in the Tower of the Hand. Beyond the glass, King's Landing sleeps beneath a blanket of darkness broken only by scattered torchlight along the city walls and the distant glow of the Red Keep's courtyards. Far below, somewhere beyond the twisting alleys of Flea Bottom, a dog barks once before silence settles over Blackwater Bay again. The air carries the scent of salt from the sea and smoke from hundreds of dying hearths, while the stone beneath your feet still remembers the warmth of the day's sun. Here, where queens have whispered their greatest fears and kings have spoken fatal commands, one woman spent years believing that no one understood this city better than she did. As you settle in, let your breathing slow, because this is the story of why Cersei Lannister was the smartest player in the Game of Thrones, and why intelligence alone was never enough to guarantee victory. If you've wandered here before quietly, keep track of which night you're sharing with these stories. If this is your first, let it be night 1. The easiest version of Cersei's story is also the least interesting. It is tempting to remember only the cruel queen who smiled at executions, mistrusted nearly everyone around her, and slowly watched her own world collapse beneath the weight of choices she believed were wise. Yet George R.R. Martin writes very few simple villains. His greatest characters often understand the world with remarkable clarity in one moment and completely deceive themselves in the next. Cersei belongs firmly among them. Over the coming hours, as the city outside grows quieter still, you will discover that many of her victories were anything but accidents, that many of the disasters blamed on her were inherited long before she ever wore a crown, and that some of the mistakes that destroyed her began with advice nearly every lord in Westeros believed was sensible. Why did one prophecy, spoken to a child, shape the decisions of an entire kingdom decades later? The answer begins not in King's Landing, but far to the west, where the golden hills of the Westerlands rise above rich veins of gold, and where House Lannister ruled from the ancient fortress of Casterly Rock long before Aegon Targaryen crossed the narrow sea. In 266 AC, twins were born to Lord Tywin Lannister and his beloved wife Joanna. They were named Jaime and Cersei. Their father already possessed one of the sharpest political minds in the Seven Kingdoms, having restored Lannister authority after the humiliations suffered during the rule of his own father, Lord Tytos Lannister. From the beginning, Cersei did not grow up inside an ordinary noble household. She grew up inside a family where weakness invited contempt, where hesitation carried a cost, and where every decision reflected upon the honor and power of the Lion of Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock itself was unlike any other castle in Westeros. Rather than rising from a hill, it had been carved into a colossal stone promontory overlooking the sunset sea, its halls extending deep beneath the earth through tunnels, galleries, armories, and treasure vaults accumulated across thousands of years. The wealth of House Lannister seemed almost endless. Gold flowed from the mines beneath the rock. Merchants filled the ports of nearby Lannisport, and every great lord in the realm understood that offending Tywin Lannister carried consequences. As a young girl, Cersei watched visiting bannermen bow before her father with measured respect rather than warm affection. Tywin rarely needed to shout. His silence alone often carried greater weight than another man's threats. Children raised beneath such authority learn early that power is rarely loud when it is secure. Joanna Lannister did not remain long enough to guide her daughter into adulthood. In 273 AC, while giving birth to Tyrion Lannister, she died in childbirth, leaving the household permanently altered. Tywin never truly recovered from her loss. His youngest son survived, but Joanna did not, and many within the family quietly sensed that Tyrion became a living reminder of grief his father refused to speak aloud. Cersei herself inherited that resentment with remarkable intensity. In later years, she would openly blame Tyrion for their mother's death, though no infant could bear such responsibility. This bitterness became one of the earliest examples of a pattern that would define much of her life. When pain arrived, she looked for a face to attach it to. If the world felt unfair, someone nearby had to be responsible. There was one person, however, whom Cersei never separated from herself. Jaime was more than her twin. He was, in her own understanding, the other half of the life she believed the gods had divided by mistake. Martin repeatedly returns to this idea in Cersei's point of view chapters. She thinks of Jaime not merely as her brother, but as a reflection of herself, sharing the same face, the same blood, and the same childhood memories. Even before their relationship crossed into forbidden territory, the bond between them stood apart from ordinary affection between siblings. Together they explored the endless passages of Casterly Rock, listened to servants gossip in forgotten corridors, and learned that noble families survived not simply through honor, but through secrets, carefully protected from public view. Another lesson arrived while Cersei was still very young, and unlike any sword lesson or courtly education, it would remain with her every waking day. Alongside her companion, Melara Heatherspoon, daughter of a minor lord sworn to House Lannister, she slipped away in search of an old fortune-teller known as Maggie the Frog. Maggie lived in a humble dwelling far removed from the grandeur of Casterly Rock, and stories claimed she possessed strange powers brought from the eastern continent. The girls came expecting entertainment. Instead, they found words that would echo across decades. Maggie tasted Cersei's blood and answered questions that had not yet fully formed inside the child's mind. Would she marry Prince Rhaegar Targaryen? No. She would marry the king. Would she become queen? Yes, but another, younger and more beautiful queen would cast her down. She would have 3 children, each wearing crowns, while the king would have many more. Then came the final warning, spoken in the old woman's rough voice. When her tears had drowned her, the Valonqar would wrap his hands around her pale white throat. These predictions deserve careful attention because Martin never presents prophecy as a simple chain of unavoidable events. Throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, prophecy behaves like a mirror that distorts as much as it reveals. Daenerys Targaryen hears mysterious visions inside the House of the Undying. Melisandre misreads flames despite possessing genuine magical gifts. Prince Rhaegar came to believe ancient prophecies pointed toward his own family, and that belief reshaped the fate of Westeros. Cersei belongs within this same tradition. The prophecy did not merely tell her what the future contained. It changed how she interpreted every smile, every friendship, every rival, until ordinary political competition became evidence that destiny itself was closing around her. Whether Maggie truly saw the future or simply planted fear inside an ambitious child remains one of the quiet mysteries Martin leaves for his readers. What makes this encounter even more unsettling is what happened to Malara Heatherspoon. Years later, Cersei remembers her old friend falling into a well and drowning shortly after their visit to Maggie. The books strongly imply that Cersei herself pushed Malara into the darkness to ensure that the prophecy remained secret forever, though the event is remembered only through fragments of memory rather than direct narration. If that interpretation is correct, then one of Cersei's earliest acts of calculated violence came not during the Wars of Kings, but during childhood itself. She had already learned a lesson that many rulers never mastered. Secrets become dangerous the moment more than one person carries them. Whether this was the beginning of her ruthlessness or merely its first visible expression is another question that lingers over every chapter of her life. As the years passed, another dream slowly dissolved. Cersei expected to marry Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne and eldest son of King Aerys II. Tywin Lannister himself hoped for such a match, believing an alliance between House Lannister and House Targaryen would unite the wealthiest family in Westeros with the royal dynasty. Yet King Aerys rejected the proposal. Relations between the king and Tywin had deteriorated badly after years in which Tywin served as hand of the king, and the insult cut deeply. Cersei never forgot it. Even before Robert's rebellion, before dragons vanished into history, before the Mad King's death at the hands of Jaime, another path had already been closed forever. Sometimes the greatest turns in history begin with a marriage that never happened. The candle beside the window burns a little lower now, its flame bending gently whenever the night wind slips through the narrow cracks in the ancient stone. Beyond the walls, King's Landing still sleeps, unaware that the choices of a lonely child in distant Casterly Rock are already reaching toward the capital she's never yet called home. Long before she wore a crown, before Robert Baratheon claimed the Iron Throne, before Eddard Stark rode south from Winterfell, Cersei Lannister had already learned 3 lessons she would never abandon. That power belongs to those willing to seize it, that fear can outlive love, and that the future, once believed, can become more dangerous than any enemy standing before you. Why did Cersei cling so fiercely to a marriage she despised when nearly every day beside Robert Baratheon deepened her resentment? The answer begins with the ashes of a dynasty. In 283 AC, Robert's rebellion ended with the deaths of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen at the Battle of the Trident and King Aerys II inside the Red Keep, slain by Sir Jaime Lannister before the city's hidden caches of wildfire could consume King's Landing. Lord Tywin Lannister, arriving late to the war, entered the capital under the pretense of loyalty before his soldiers sacked the city, forever tying House Lannister to Robert's victory. Soon afterward, Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne, and the marriage Tywin had once sought with the Targaryens was replaced by another that promised to unite the new king with the richest house in Westeros. Cersei became Queen of the 7 Kingdoms. But she entered her marriage believing she had accepted a crown, while surrendering nearly every illusion she had once cherished. For a brief moment, she thought happiness might still be possible. In her own recollections from A Feast for Crows, Cersei remembers Robert speaking Lyanna Stark's name on their wedding night, It lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Whatever hope she carried from Casterly Rock disappeared before dawn. Robert had not married the woman he desired. He had married the woman politics required. The marriage became an alliance rather than a partnership almost immediately. And from that first disappointment grew years of bitterness that neither crown nor wealth could soften. Martin allows Cersei to remember this scene with remarkable clarity because, for her, it explained nearly everything that followed. Robert himself remains one of the great contradictions in Westerosi history. The young lord who shattered Prince Rhaegar's breastplate with his great warhammer inspired fierce loyalty during the rebellion. Yet the victorious king rarely displayed the same discipline that had carried him through war. He preferred hunting to governing, feasting to council meetings, and tournaments to accounts of taxes or harvests. The burdens of rule gradually fell upon Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, while men like Stannis Baratheon, Renly Baratheon, Grand Maester Pycelle, Lord Varys, and Peter Baelish each managed different pieces of the kingdom's machinery. Cersei watched all of this closely. She learned something essential. The Iron Throne possessed enormous authority, but the person seated upon it did not necessarily wield real power. This distinction became one of the foundations of her political thinking. A king issued commands. A ruler controlled outcomes. Robert excelled at the first and neglected the second. While he hunted boar in the Kingswood or drank with old companions, others quietly determined appointments, negotiated debts, balanced rival houses, and managed the endless flow of information entering the Red Keep. Unlike Robert, Cersei paid attention to every face entering the throne room. She remembered who flattered too eagerly, which bannermen whispered together after court, and which servants lingered longer than necessary outside closed doors. Even before she possessed formal authority, she was studying the kingdom as though every conversation contained another hidden move in a much larger game. Why then did she choose the most dangerous secret imaginable? Long before Robert's death, Cersei resumed her relationship with Jaime Lannister. In truth, it had never entirely ended. Their bond, rooted in childhood, continued despite law, religion, and custom forbidding it. The faith of the Seven condemned incest as an abomination except among House Targaryen, whose dragon lord ancestry had long been treated as a unique exception before. Even that practice declined after the Dance of the Dragons. House Lannister enjoyed no such privilege. Every child born of Jaime and Cersei risked exposing both of them to charges of treason, adultery, and sacrilege. Yet from Cersei's perspective, the decision solved a different problem entirely. She refused to place a child of Robert Baratheon upon the Iron Throne. The books strongly emphasize that all three royal children, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, possessed the unmistakable golden hair and green eyes associated with House Lannister. This stood in striking contrast to Robert's acknowledged bastards, including Maya Stone in the Vale, Gendry in King's Landing, Edric Storm at Storm's End, and others whose dark Baratheon coloring remained remarkably consistent. Jon Arryn eventually noticed the pattern while investigating noble lineages, repeatedly studying the massive genealogical volume, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms. His final words, "The seed is strong," puzzled many until Eddard Stark completed the same investigation. The evidence was not magic or prophecy, it was genealogy heraldry, and generations of inherited traits carefully preserved by maesters. Cersei often receives credit for deceiving the realm, yet the deception succeeded, partly because few powerful men wished to examine what stood plainly before them. Robert loved hunting, drinking, and warfare far more than the details of family resemblance. Renly Baratheon reportedly joked about Joffrey's appearance without pressing the matter. Grand Maester Pycelle remained fiercely loyal to House Lannister. Varys certainly knew more than he admitted, but his loyalty served a far larger design, involving the stability of the realm and eventually another Targaryen claimant. Peter Baelish understood that uncertainty could always become profit. The secret survived because many influential people found it more useful, unresolved than exposed. Did Cersei truly build a network of spies equal to Varys's famous little birds? Not quite, yet she developed a different kind of intelligence system. Queens occupied a unique position within the Red Keep. Ladies-in-waiting carried gossip between noble households. Septas overheard confessions and family disagreements. Household servants noticed which doors remained locked late into the night. Guards remembered who entered forgotten towers after midnight. Cersei understood that information rarely arrived in polished reports. It drifted through kitchens, corridors, gardens, and feast halls before reaching the small council. She listened carefully enough that fragments often became patterns. The Red Keep itself encouraged such vigilance. Built by King Maegor I, Targaryen after Aegon's conquest, the castle contained hidden passages known only to a select few. According to long-standing tradition, Maegor executed many of the builders once construction finished so that its secrets would remain hidden forever. Centuries later, Varys navigated these tunnels with astonishing ease, while Tyrion would eventually discover portions of them himself. Cersei never possessed complete knowledge of every concealed stair and passage, but she understood the principle. A castle was never merely walls and towers. It was also everything that happened where no one expected witnesses. Another question quietly emerges here. If Cersei understood politics so well, why did she fail to build genuine friendships among the great houses? The answer lies partly inside her upbringing beneath Tywin. Trust was never presented as strength. Loyalty had to be purchased, rewarded, or enforced. Even marriages became contracts rather than emotional bonds. House Tyrell smiled while pursuing reach interests. House Martell remembered Princess Aelia and her murdered children. House Greyjoy obeyed only after defeat during Balon Greyjoy's failed rebellion in 289 AC. Every great family carried ambitions independent of the Iron Throne. Cersei concluded that affection between rulers lasted only until interests diverged. Yet there remained one figure whose approval she still desired more than she admitted, even to herself. Tywin Lannister seldom praised his daughter openly. He valued competence, obedience, and family prestige above displays of affection. Jaime was expected to inherit Casterly Rock until joining the Kingsguard. Tyrion, despite undeniable intelligence, was dismissed because of his birth and physical condition. Cersei, though queen, often sensed that her father judged her capable only within limits defined by her sex. This belief hardened into quiet determination. If the realm refused to see her as another Tywin, then she would prove herself by mastering the same game that had made him feared, from the Sunset Sea to the Wall. Outside the Tower of the Hand, the wind stirs again across Blackwater Bay, carrying the distant creak of ships resting against their moorings below Aegon's high hill. The candle burns steadily now, throwing long shadows across maps, ledgers, and sealed letters left behind by generations of hands. Somewhere in these silent chambers, years before swords were drawn against House Stark, before the War of the Five Kings erupted across Westeros, Cersei had already reached a dangerous conclusion. Crowns could be inherited, armies could be raised, gold could be spent. But the person who truly understood how power flowed through King's Landing could shape the fate of kingdoms without ever lifting a sword. Why did Eddard Stark, one of the most honorable men in the history of Westeros, lose a political struggle he seemed to have already won? At first glance, the answer appears painfully simple. He discovered the truth about Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen before almost anyone else of consequence. He possessed Robert Baratheon's written will, naming him protector of the realm until Joffrey came of age. He commanded the loyalty of his own household guard and enjoyed the respect of much of the court. Yet every advantage Ned held depended upon one dangerous assumption: that the rules of honor governed King's Landing as surely as they governed Winterfell. Cersei had spent nearly 2 decades learning that they did not. The crisis truly began with another death. Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, Warden of the East, foster father to both Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark, and hand of the king for almost the entirety of Robert's reign, died suddenly in 298 AC. Officially, Grand Maester Pycelle announced that illness had taken him. His widow, Lisa Arryn, fled King's Landing with their sickly son, Robert Arryn, returning to the Eyrie before accusing the Lannisters of murder in a secret letter sent to Winterfell. Readers later learned that this accusation itself was a deception engineered by Peter Baelish and Lysa, whose conspiracy reached back years before the War of the Five Kings. Cersei did not kill Jon Arryn in the books, yet his death created the political vacuum she understood better than anyone else at court. When King Robert rode north to Winterfell, accompanied by Queen Cersei, Prince Joffrey, Prince Tommen, Princess Myrcella, Sandor Clegane, Sir Barristan Selmy, Jaime Lannister, and much of the royal household, he believed he was simply asking an old friend to replace the man he had lost. Ned accepted the office reluctantly after the attempted assassination of Bran Stark, another event secretly connected to the royal family's hidden scandal. Leaving Winterfell behind, Eddard carried his daughters, Sansa and Arya, south toward a city whose customs differed from everything he had known in the north. King's Landing rewarded flexibility. Winterfell rewarded consistency. The distinction mattered more than either man realized. One of Martin's quiet strengths lies in showing how different characters gather information. Ned searched through books, questioned witnesses, and followed evidence patiently. He spoke with Grand Maester Pycelle, examined the massive volume of noble genealogies Jon Arryn had borrowed, questioned armorers, and eventually found Gendry, Robert's bastard apprentice working in Tobo Mott's smithy. Every confirmed bastard of Robert Baratheon possessed black hair inherited from House Baratheon. Every supposed royal heir displayed unmistakable Lannister features. Instead, Ned solved the mystery not through magic or spies, but through careful observation. Ironically, his investigation resembled the work of a Maester more than that of a great lord. Cersei knew something equally important. Discovery alone changes nothing unless it is paired with force. She had lived with the secret every day since Joffrey's birth. She knew the risks before Ned ever suspected them. By the time he confronted her in the God's Wood of the Red Keep, she had already considered countless possible futures. Their conversation remains one of the defining exchanges in a Game of Thrones. Ned openly accused her of bearing Jaime's children. Cersei admitted the truth with startling composure. Then she offered no elaborate defense. Instead, she reminded Ned of the brutal reality beneath noble ideals. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground. Many readers remember this line because of its dramatic force, yet its context reveals something more subtle. Cersei did not threaten Ned simply to frighten him. She was describing the political philosophy by which she genuinely lived. She understood that mercy toward an opponent who possessed fatal knowledge invited destruction. At the same time, Ned made a decision entirely consistent with his character. Rather than arrest her immediately, he warned her to flee with her children before Robert returned from his hunt. The choice echoed another defining moment from years earlier, when Ned concealed the identity of Jon Snow to protect an innocent child from Robert's hatred of Targaryens. Honor demanded consistency. Even when circumstances changed, Ned remained Ned Stark. Why then did Robert's hunting trip become the turning point instead of another ordinary royal excursion? The answer rests with Sir Lancel Lannister, cousin to Cersei and Jaime. Robert loved hunting wild boar, especially after heavy drinking, and Cersei quietly encouraged both habits. According to the books, Lancel supplied the king with exceptionally strong wine throughout the hunt at the queen's instruction. No poison touched Robert's cup. No assassin waited among the trees. The king simply faced a massive boar while badly intoxicated, and the animal gored him so terribly that even returning to the Red Keep alive proved little more than borrowed time. Cersei had not arranged every detail of his death. She merely ensured that chance favored the outcome she required. This distinction often disappears in simplified retellings, yet it reveals genuine political intelligence. Rather than constructing an elaborate assassination vulnerable to discovery, Cersei exploited Robert's own predictable habits. She understood his pride, his appetite, and his refusal to acknowledge limits. Robert himself chose to continue drinking. Robert himself chose to confront the boar. Even on his deathbed, he joked grimly about the encounter. The queen merely nudged existing behavior toward catastrophe. It was a colder strategy than open murder because it relied upon her target remaining exactly the man he had always been. Robert's final hours offered Ned what appeared to be one last opportunity. The dying king signed a document naming Eddard Stark, protector of the realm, until my heir reached maturity. Ned quietly altered the wording to my rightful heir, believing Stannis Baratheon should inherit once the truth emerged. Legally, morally, and according to the laws of succession established after Aegon's conquest, Stannis possessed the strongest claim. Yet laws require people willing to enforce them. The small council itself stood divided. Renly Baratheon urged immediate action. Littlefinger offered soldiers from the city watch. Varys spoke in riddles while quietly measuring every possible outcome. Pycelle favored delay that benefited the Lannisters. Cersei, meanwhile, moved with remarkable speed. Within hours of Robert's death, Joffrey was crowned before the court could organize meaningful resistance. The gold cloaks of the City Watch, commanded by Janos Slynt, appeared to support Ned until Peter Baelish revealed where his true investment lay. "I did warn you not to trust me," Littlefinger tells Ned after placing a dagger beneath his chin. The betrayal has become legendary among readers, yet it also illustrates something often overlooked. Cersei did not personally command Janos Slynt or Littlefinger's ambitions. She succeeded because she recognized which men already valued advancement above loyalty. Rather than creating treachery, she purchased it. Could Ned Stark have prevailed by acting more ruthlessly? This question has occupied readers since A Game of Thrones first appeared. Some argue he should have accepted Renly's proposal to seize Joffrey and Tommen immediately after Robert's death. Others believe he should have trusted Stannis from the beginning or arrested Cersei in the Godswood before warning her. These alternatives remain intriguing because Martin deliberately presents several roads not taken, yet each requires Ned to abandon qualities that define him. Had he acted like Tywin Lannister or Peter Baelish, he would no longer have been Eddard Stark. His defeat emerged not from stupidity, but from consistency in a political world that increasingly rewarded its opposite. As dawn begins to pale the eastern sky beyond Blackwater Bay, the halls of the Red Keep slowly awaken. Servants prepare the throne room. Gold cloaks change watch upon the gates. Somewhere below, the bells of the Great Sept call the faithful to morning prayers. Above them all, inside chambers where candles have burned through the longest night, Queen Cersei Lannister has survived the most dangerous challenge of her reign so far. She has not won through superior armies or ancient bloodlines. She has won because she understood that in King's Landing, truth alone has never been enough. Only truth, backed by power, can claim the Iron Throne. Why did Cersei remain calm, while almost everyone around her feared King Joffrey? To much of Westeros, Joffrey Baratheon appeared unpredictable from the beginning of his reign. He ordered the execution of Eddard Stark, despite promises of mercy carefully arranged by Cersei, Varys, and even Grand Maester Pycelle. He delighted in humiliating Sansa Stark before the court, demanded spectacles of cruelty, and treated counsel as weakness rather than wisdom. Yet Cersei rarely regarded her eldest son as an enemy. She saw him as something far more dangerous, an extension of herself that refused to obey. Like many parents of exceptional children, or children they believe exceptional, she mistook blood for influence. She assumed love would eventually succeed where commands failed. Ned Stark's execution marked the first great fracture in Cersei's political design. After Joffrey's accession, Varys and the small council had quietly encouraged clemency, allowing Ned to confess treason publicly and take the Black would remove a rival while preserving peace with the North. Sansa Stark herself pleaded before the court, believing mercy remained possible. Cersei supported the arrangement because it solved several problems at once. Winterfell would lose its lord without gaining a martyr, Robb Stark might accept peace, and the realm could stabilize before rebellion gathered strength. Then, standing upon the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor, Joffrey simply rejected the agreed plan and commanded Sir Elend Payne to strike off Eddard Stark's head. The consequences spread across Westeros almost immediately. Robb Stark, already marching south after his father's imprisonment, no longer fought to free a captive, but to avenge a murdered lord. The northern banners gathered beneath House Stark in greater numbers, while the Riverlands, devastated by Sir Gregor Clegane's raids under Tywin's broader strategy, found renewed purpose. Greatjon Umber, Mage Mormont, Rickard Karstark, Galbart Glover, Roose Bolton, and many other northern lords proclaimed Robb king in the north after his victories at the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps outside River Run. One impulsive order transformed a political dispute into a war of kingdoms. Cersei understood exactly what had been lost. In her point of view chapters, she repeatedly remembers Joffrey's decision with frustration rather than triumph. She had not wanted Ned alive because she admired him. She wanted him alive because dead enemies often become more useful to their followers than living prisoners. This distinction separates political calculation from personal vengeance. Joffrey sought immediate satisfaction. Cersei measured long-term consequences. Even when readers rightly condemn her methods, Martin consistently shows that she usually recognizes the broader board upon which the game is played. Why then did she fail to restrain her own son? Part of the answer lies in Robert's long absence as a father. Throughout Joffrey's childhood, discipline rarely came from the king. Robert alternated between indifference and explosive anger, while Cersei defended her children almost automatically. Jaime, though their true father, could never openly assume that role. The result was a prince who inherited royal authority without meaningful limits. Cersei believed she was protecting him from humiliation. Instead, she unintentionally convinced him that every desire deserved obedience. By the time he became king, correction itself felt like an insult to him. One revealing moment occurs after Joffrey publicly orders Sir Meryn Trant to beat Sansa Stark. Cersei later remarks that the girl should have been treated with greater care because she remained valuable as a political hostage. Tyrion Lannister reacts even more directly, slapping Joffrey before the assembled court and ordering the King's Guard to stop the abuse. Tyrion recognized what Cersei often could not admit aloud. Terror is expensive. Every unnecessary act of cruelty creates another enemy, and kingdoms eventually run out of people willing to forgive. Cersei understood the principle in theory. Maternal devotion made applying it to Joffrey extraordinarily difficult. As the War of the Five Kings widened, another player emerged whose intelligence often rivaled Cersei's own. Tyrion Lannister arrived in King's Landing to serve as acting hand of the king while Tywin campaigned in the Riverlands. Their relationship had always been poisoned by mutual suspicion. Cersei blamed Tyrion for Joanna's death, distrusted his wit, and suspected him of endless conspiracies. Tyrion, for his part, understood that his sister viewed nearly every disagreement as betrayal. Their contest inside the Red Keep became one of Martin's finest studies of political maneuvering because both siblings possessed genuine intelligence while interpreting each other's motives through years of accumulated resentment. Tyrion immediately began testing the loyalty of the small council using one of the cleverest stratagems in the novels. He privately presented 3 different marriage proposals for Princess Myrcella to Grand Maester Pycelle, Petyr Baelish, and Lord Varys. giving each man different details. When Cersei confronted him with the version told only to Pycelle, Tyrion identified the leak without accusation or torture. He arrested Pycelle shortly afterward, demonstrating that information itself could expose hidden loyalties. Cersei watched this unfold with a mixture of anger and reluctant recognition. Tyrion had inherited far more of Tywin's political instincts than either sibling wished to acknowledge. Yet even Tyrion underestimated one aspect of Cersei's thinking. She constantly prepared for the possibility that King's Landing might fall. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself the rightful king after receiving letters describing Joffrey's true parentage. Renly Baratheon claimed the throne through military strength rather than strict succession. Balon Greyjoy crowned himself King of the Isles and the North. Robb Stark ruled independently beyond the Neck. From Dragonstone to Pike, Westeros splintered into competing crowns. Cersei understood that defeat in such a struggle meant more than exile. Victorious armies often treated captured royal families with brutal efficiency. Why did she keep poison close at hand during the Battle of the Blackwater? The answer reveals both her greatest fear and her deepest resolve. As Stannis Baratheon's fleet entered Blackwater Bay in 299 AC, bringing hundreds of ships beneath the fiery stag banners of House Baratheon, Cersei remained within Maegor's holdfast, alongside Tommen, Sansa Stark, noble women of the court, and frightened children. She carried a vial of essence of nightshade. If the castle fell and Stannis' soldiers broke through the final defenses, she intended to give Tommen a swift death, rather than allow him to be paraded through the streets or executed after capture. In the television adaptation, she speaks this intention openly, but even in the books, her preparations and inner thoughts make the same determination unmistakable. Outside those walls, Tyrion commanded the city's defense with remarkable effectiveness. He ordered the construction of a massive chain across the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, working with Hallyne and the Alchemists' Guild to prepare enormous stores of wildfire. When Stannis' fleet advanced, the burning river erupted into emerald flames that consumed ships and men alike. The chain trapped many vessels inside the inferno, multiplying the destruction. Tyrion himself later led a sortie through the Mud Gate before suffering a terrible wound from Sir Mandon Moore of the King's Guard, whose attack many readers believe was arranged by hidden political enemies. Meanwhile, Lord Tywin Lannister and Sir Garland Tyrell arrived with fresh forces, turning certain defeat into decisive victory. When the battle ended, songs celebrated Tywin, praised House Tyrell, and remembered King Joffrey as triumphant despite his retreat from the walls. Tyrion's role faded into the background. Almost immediately, Cersei observed this shift with quiet satisfaction because she instinctively understood another rule of politics. Victory belongs not only to those who achieve it, but also to those who shape the story afterward. History in Westeros is written by maesters, sung by minstrels, and repeated by lords who survived. Facts alone rarely determine reputation. As evening settles once more over King's Landing, the smoke of wildfire has long drifted away from Blackwater Bay, yet its bitter scent seems to linger inside the ancient stones of the Red Keep. The city still stands. House Lannister still rules. Queen Cersei has preserved her children through another catastrophe, though not by controlling every event as she once imagined possible. Slowly, almost reluctantly, another lesson begins to emerge before her. Outsmarting rivals is difficult. Outsmarting one's own family may be impossible. Why did Tywin Lannister, the man Cersei admired above almost anyone else, become the greatest obstacle to her own ambitions? At first, that seems almost impossible. Tywin had restored the prestige of House Lannister after the weak rule of Lord Tydos. He had crushed Houses Rhaen and Tarbeck in his youth, earning a fearsome reputation throughout the Seven Kingdoms. He had served as Hand of the King to Aerys II for nearly 20 years, governing so effectively that many remembered those years as among the most prosperous of the Targaryen reign. Every lesson Cersei valued about strength, decisiveness, and political authority came from watching him. Yet once Tywin returned to King's Landing after the Battle of the Blackwater in 299 AC, she discovered that the daughter who wished to become another Tywin would never be allowed to stand beside him as an equal. The triumph at Blackwater transformed the balance of power almost overnight. Lord Mace Tyrell entered the capital with the armies of the Reach. Sir Garland Tyrell received much of the public praise for fighting in Renly Baratheon's distinctive armor during the final stages of the battle, helping spread panic among Stannis' exhausted soldiers. The alliance between Houses Lannister and Tyrell secured the largest military coalition remaining in Westeros. King Joffrey's betrothal to Sansa Stark was dissolved, and preparations immediately began for his marriage to Margaery Tyrell. At the same time, Tywin resumed the office of Hand of the King, quietly reclaiming practical authority over the realm while allowing Joffrey to retain the appearance of royal independence. Cersei expected gratitude after preserving the capital through months of crisis. Instead, she found herself increasingly excluded from meaningful decisions. Small council meetings once again revolved around Tywin's judgments. Petyr Baelish received Harrenhal and was dispatched to negotiate with the Tyrells. Varys continued supplying intelligence. Pycelle returned to favor after his earlier imprisonment under Tyrion. Even Tyrion, though badly wounded, remained useful enough for Tywin to employ when necessary. Cersei possessed the title of Queen Regent, yet her father rarely consulted her before announcing policies. It was an old pattern returning in a new form. She wore the crown. He held the reins. One conversation between father and daughter reveals the difference between them more clearly than any battle. Tywin tells Cersei that she is not nearly as clever as she imagines herself to be. The words cut deeply because they strike the very insecurity she has carried since childhood. Cersei believes she has survived Robert, outmaneuvered Ned Stark, held the capital together during war, and preserved House Lannister through chaos. Tywin sees something different. He sees a woman capable of remarkable insight who too often allows pride, anger, and personal grievance to interfere with careful calculation. Neither judgment is entirely wrong. Their tragedy lies in the fact that each recognizes only half of the other's truth. Why did Tywin insist on arranging marriages that seemed to ignore the wishes of his own children? The answer reaches back through generations of noble politics. To Tywin, marriage existed first as an instrument of statecraft. Personal happiness ranked far below dynastic stability. He ordered Tyrion to wed Sansa Stark because control of Winterfell might someday pass through her claim. He accepted Joffrey's marriage to Margaery Tyrell because the Reach possessed immense wealth, fertile lands, and the largest remaining army in Westeros. Then he informed Cersei that she herself would marry Sir Willis Tyrell, heir to Highgarden. The proposal promised to bind the two greatest houses in the realm together permanently. It also ignored everything Cersei believed she had earned. Her refusal was immediate and fierce. Cersei argued that she was already queen, already a widow, already indispensable to the government of the realm. Tywin dismissed each objection with the same cold certainty that had guided his entire political career. A Lannister served the family before serving personal desire. He reminded her that she herself had once urged Tyrion to obey a marriage commanded by their father. The irony was impossible to escape. Cersei had long supported sacrifice when it belonged to someone else. Now the same principle had returned to claim her freedom. This conflict reveals one of the deepest differences between Tywin and Cersei as political thinkers. Tywin generally viewed individuals as pieces within a larger structure. A useful marriage strengthened alliances. An unfortunate death removed an obstacle. A successful campaign reshaped the map. Cersei rarely separated politics from emotion so completely. She remembered insults for years. She rewarded personal loyalty generously. She punished perceived betrayal with lasting intensity. These qualities sometimes allowed her to understand human motivations better than Tywin did, yet they also narrowed her field of vision whenever personal feelings entered the equation. Why did Tywin continue underestimating his daughter when she'd already demonstrated considerable political skill? Some readers argue that simple misogyny explains everything, and certainly the books portray Westeros as a deeply patriarchal society where daughters rarely inherit equal authority beside sons. Tywin himself repeatedly expresses conventional assumptions about the roles of noble women, yet there is another layer. He also recognized traits in Cersei that reminded him uncomfortably of King Aerys II during his later years. Growing suspicion, increasing impatience with disagreement, and confidence that fear alone could sustain authority. Whether Tywin consciously made that comparison remains uncertain, but Martin scatters enough parallels throughout the narrative to invite the question. Meanwhile, another dangerous current flowed beneath the surface of the capital. Prince Oberyn Martell arrived from Dorne to attend Joffrey's wedding, bringing with him memories that reached back to the sack of King's Landing. During Tywin's assault in 283 AC, Princess Elia Martell, wife of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, had been murdered alongside her children, Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon. Sir Gregor Clegane and Sir Amory Lorch carried out the killings, yet many in Dorne held Tywin ultimately responsible. Oberyn did not conceal his hatred. Every feast, every council, every formal greeting unfolded beneath the shadow of an old crime that had never truly been answered. Cersei noticed Oberyn's presence immediately because she instinctively recognized people who entered rooms carrying hidden intentions. She distrusted the Red Viper from the moment he crossed the gates of King's Landing. In this case, her instincts served her well. Oberyn had not journeyed across half a continent merely to celebrate a royal marriage. He came seeking justice, revenge, or perhaps both. Cersei often receives criticism for seeing conspiracies everywhere, yet the capital genuinely overflowed with competing agendas. Dorne sought vengeance, the Tyrells sought influence, Littlefinger sought opportunity. Varys served designs that stretched beyond the narrow sea. Suspicion sometimes reflected reality rather than madness. Another revealing detail appears during these months. While Tywin concentrated on kingdoms, armies, and treaties, Cersei spent increasing attention on the smaller mechanics of power inside the Red Keep. Which guards could be trusted? Which servants carried rumors to Margaery's household? Which members of the Kingsguard answered first to Joffrey, to Tywin, or to themselves? Men like Sir Osmond Kettleblack gradually entered her circle because they offered unquestioning loyalty in exchange for advancement. Tywin would likely have considered such men too insignificant for sustained attention. Cersei understood that kingdoms sometimes shifted because of the decisions of people history barely remembers. Then came the wedding feast that history would forever call the Purple Wedding. In 300 AC, before the assembled nobility of Westeros, King Joffrey collapsed after drinking wine during the celebration of his marriage to Margaery Tyrell. His face darkened, his throat closed, and he died in agony before the eyes of his mother. The novels ultimately reveal that Lady Olenna Tyrell and Petyr Baelish orchestrated the poisoning using the Strangler, though Cersei immediately blamed Tyrion. Grief overwhelmed calculation. She ordered her brother seized before the court, while the king's body still lay upon the floor. For one terrible moment, every lesson Tywin had tried to teach about patience disappeared beneath the pain of losing her firstborn son. As the bells of the Great Sept toll for another royal death, the corridors of the Red Keep fill once more with hurried footsteps and whispered accusations. Outside King's Landing continues its ordinary rhythms, markets opening beneath the city walls, as though kings do not die and dynasties do not tremble. Inside the castle, however, Queen Cersei feels something changing that even Tywin cannot control. For the first time in years, politics is no longer merely a contest of intelligence. It has become personal in a way neither father nor daughter can ever undo. Why did Cersei's greatest rise begin with the deaths of the two men who had overshadowed her for most of her life? King Joffrey died at his own wedding feast, and only weeks later, Lord Tywin Lannister was found dead in the Tower of the Hand, slain by Tyrion Lannister with a crossbow while sitting upon the privy. Within a remarkably short span, the two strongest personalities dominating Cersei's world disappeared. One had been the son she believed destined to secure the Lannister legacy. The other had been the father whose judgment she both admired and resented. Their absence created a political vacuum unlike anything she had experienced before. For the first time since becoming queen, no one stood above her within House Lannister itself. Tywin's death altered far more than the succession of Casterly Rock. During his years as Hand, the machinery of government had operated with relentless efficiency. Ravens received answers quickly, grain shipments were monitored, gold from the Westerlands supported armies across the Riverlands and Crownlands. Even men who disliked Tywin acknowledged that he inspired discipline simply through reputation. Once he was gone, those routines did not immediately collapse, but they lost the force that had held them together. Cersei believed this was finally her opportunity to govern as she had always wished, The new king was Tommen Baratheon, gentle where Joffrey had been cruel, eager to please where his brother had demanded obedience. Unlike Joffrey, Tommen listened carefully to adults around him. He enjoyed practicing with kittens more than watching executions and approached kingship with genuine innocence. Cersei interpreted these qualities as advantages. A young, compliant king allowed the Queen Regent to exercise authority directly. In practice, however, Tommen's kindness also made him susceptible to influence from everyone else at court, especially members of House Tyrell, who now surrounded him through his marriage to Margaery. Why did Cersei see Margaery Tyrell as such an immediate threat when the young queen behaved with courtesy toward nearly everyone? Part of the answer lies inside Maggie the Frog's prophecy. Years earlier, the old woman had foretold that another queen, younger and more beautiful, would cast Cersei down and take from her all she held dear. Every smile Margaery offered, every cheer from the people of King's Landing, every moment Tommen laughed in her company became evidence the prophecy was unfolding exactly as promised. Readers possess an important advantage over Cersei. We know that Martin repeatedly demonstrates how belief in prophecy often distorts judgment. Cersei, however, experiences each coincidence as confirmation that fate itself has become her political opponent. In truth, Margaery presented a far more complicated figure than Cersei imagined. The books never portray her as openly malicious. She cultivated popularity through generosity, appearing among the small folk, visiting the sick, distributing food, and treating young King Tommen with warmth rather than intimidation. House Tyrell certainly pursued greater influence at court. Lord Mace Tyrell expected offices, honors, and military authority worthy of the Reach's enormous contribution during the War of the Five Kings. Yet political ambition alone did not prove that Margaery intended Cersei's destruction. The Queen Regent increasingly blurred the distinction between ordinary rivalry and existential conspiracy. One of Cersei's first important decisions after Tywin's death revealed both her strengths and her weaknesses. She elevated Qyburn, formerly a Maester of the Citadel, before being stripped of his chain for conducting forbidden experiments upon living people. Other lords viewed him with discomfort or outright disgust. Cersei saw something different. Qyburn asked few moral questions. He offered practical solutions without lecturing about tradition or precedent. More importantly, his loyalty flowed entirely toward the queen who had rescued him from obscurity. Cersei consistently preferred capable outsiders, dependent upon her favor over powerful nobles whose allegiance shifted with circumstance. Qyburn's influence expanded steadily. He inherited many of the responsibilities once held by Grand Maester Pycelle, while continuing strange investigations in hidden chambers beneath the Red Keep. There he also tended to Sir Gregor Clegane, who had suffered terrible wounds after his duel with Prince Oberyn Martell. Officially, the Mountain lingered near death from poisoned spear wounds inflicted during the trial by combat. Qyburn insisted he possessed treatments unlike those practiced by conventional maesters. Martin deliberately leaves much of this process hidden from readers, allowing mystery to surround what eventually emerges as Sir Robert Strong. Cersei never asked many questions about methods. Results interested her far more than explanations. Why did she also place such extraordinary trust in men like the Kettleblacks? Sir Osmond Kettleblack and his brothers, Osfrid and Osney, entered royal service through Peter Baelish before gradually attaching themselves to Cersei's household. They were not ancient nobles with proud family histories. They were ambitious sellswords elevated by opportunity. Tywin generally relied upon great houses because their interests aligned with long-term stability. Cersei preferred individuals who owed everything to her personally. In theory, this created fierce loyalty. In reality, it also surrounded her with men whose allegiance depended entirely upon continued rewards. The dismissal of Grand Maester Pycelle illustrates this shift in governing philosophy. Pycelle had served multiple kings, stretching back to the reign of Aerys II, and possessed decades of institutional knowledge. Cersei increasingly viewed him as old, slow, and too closely associated with her father's generation. She publicly humiliated him, stripped him of many responsibilities, and elevated Qyburn in his place. From one perspective, this appears decisive. From another, it removed one of the few experienced advisors willing to challenge impulsive decisions. Competence often sounds less impressive than innovation, but kingdoms usually survive because experienced administrators quietly prevent disasters before anyone notices them. Another subtle transformation unfolded inside the small council. Kevan Lannister, Tywin's younger brother, possessed genuine military experience and a calmer temperament than either Cersei or Jaime. During the War of the Five Kings, he had commanded armies effectively, advised Tywin faithfully, and earned widespread respect among Lannister bannermen. Cersei repeatedly dismissed his advice because she interpreted disagreement as disloyalty. Their relationship deteriorated until Kevan eventually withdrew from court. Rather than continue serving under conditions he believed harmful to the realm. Martin presents this as one of Cersei's most consequential political errors. She steadily replaced seasoned counselors with agreeable voices. Was this merely arrogance, or did Cersei have rational reasons to distrust experienced advisors? Looking at the history she carried, her caution becomes easier to understand. Jon Arryn had investigated her children. Stannis Baratheon had gathered evidence against her. Eddard Stark had nearly exposed everything. Tyrion had outmaneuvered members of the small council repeatedly. Varys hid motives no one fully understood. Littlefinger manipulated kingdoms while pretending to serve them. Nearly every senior statesman around the Iron Throne had, at one time or another, threatened her position. Cersei concluded that independence required surrounding herself with people who depended entirely upon her survival. Yet there is a quiet irony here. Tywin had often warned that rulers become dangerous to themselves when they hear only agreement. Cersei believed she'd escaped her father's shadow at last. Without realizing it, she also abandoned one of his most valuable habits. Tywin welcomed contradiction during private councils because it sharpened his own decisions, even if the final judgment remained his alone. Cersei increasingly mistook obedience for wisdom. The difference was small at first, almost invisible amid daily governance. Over time, however, it widened into one of the deepest cracks beneath her reign. Night settles gently over the Red Keep once more. In chambers once occupied by Tywin Lannister, new voices now echo through corridors lined with ancient tapestries and polished stone. The Queen Regent finally possesses the freedom she sought for so many years. No father issues commands. No elder son ignores her authority. No hand overshadows her decisions. The game now belongs to Cersei alone, and for the first time, every victory and every mistake will carry only her own name. Why would one of the most politically experienced people in Westeros deliberately restore an armed religious order that previous kings had spent centuries dismantling? Few decisions in Cersei's life have inspired more debate. Looking backward, the answer appears obvious. Restoring the faith militant allowed a new and independent military force to grow inside King's Landing itself. Looking forward from Cersei's position, however, the calculation seemed far more attractive. The Iron Throne owed the faith of the Seven an enormous financial debt accumulated under Robert Baratheon's extravagant reign. The crown also needed allies capable of weakening House Tyrell without openly declaring war upon them. Cersei believed she had found a solution that solved both problems at once. To understand the magnitude of that choice, it helps to remember what the faith militant had once been. During the early Targaryen dynasty, the warriors' sons and the poor fellows formed militant religious orders devoted to defending the faith of the Seven. Their resistance became so fierce during the reigns of Aenys the First and Maegor the First that open war erupted between crown and faith. Only under King Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, did lasting reconciliation emerge, with the militant orders formally disbanded in exchange for peace between throne and sept. For more than 2 centuries afterward, the faith remained spiritually influential, but militarily restrained. Cersei was preparing to reverse one of the longest-standing political settlements in Westerosi history. The man who received this extraordinary opportunity hardly resembled the powerful High Septons of earlier generations. After the death of the previous High Septon during the riots of King's Landing in 299 AC, another was briefly elevated before dying under mysterious circumstances. Eventually, the most devout chose a humble Septon, widely known simply as the High Sparrow. Unlike many church leaders before him, he rejected luxury almost completely. He walked barefoot. He wore rough robes instead of rich vestments. He lived among ordinary worshippers rather than inside lavish chambers. Thousands of starving refugees, war widows, orphans, and displaced peasants viewed him as a genuine holy man rather than another political figure. Why did Cersei underestimate him so profoundly? Part of the answer lies in the assumption she had carried since childhood. Noble birth mattered enormously within the 7 kingdoms. Wealth commanded attention. Castles inspired obedience. The High Sparrow possessed none of these traditional sources of authority. He controlled no great army, owned no vast estates, and came from no ancient house. Cersei concluded that such a man would naturally become grateful for royal favor. She mistook humility for dependence. In reality, his independence came precisely because he desired almost nothing the crown could offer him. The Riverlands had suffered terribly during the War of the 5 Kings. Villages burned beneath the campaigns of Tywin Lannister, Sir Gregor Clegane, Sir Amory Lorch, and countless smaller companies moving across the countryside. Harrenhal changed hands repeatedly. The lands around the Trident filled with refugees whose homes no longer existed. Broken men wandered abandoned roads carrying rusted weapons, and fading memories of vanished lords. Brienne of Tarth witnesses much of this devastation during A Feast for Crows, offering readers perhaps the clearest picture of war's ordinary victims. These people poured toward King's Landing seeking food, shelter, and hope. The High Sparrow welcomed them when few others did. Cersei saw another opportunity hidden inside this growing movement. Margaery Tyrell's popularity among the small folk irritated her deeply. The young queen visited orphanages, distributed alms, and appeared regularly before the people. Every smiling crowd seemed to echo Maggie's prophecy. If the faith investigated Margaery's behavior, perhaps whispers of impropriety could diminish her influence. Cersei therefore encouraged accusations concerning Margaery's supposed sexual conduct, relying heavily upon testimony from men like Sir Osney Kettleblack, whose loyalty she believed secure. The plan appeared elegant. Religious authority would accomplish what open political confrontation could not. Yet every successful political strategy depends upon one dangerous assumption. Cersei assumed she could predict how the High Sparrow would define justice. Instead of behaving like a pliable court official, he behaved like exactly what he claimed to be, a man convinced that every soul, noble or common, answered equally before the seven. Margaery was indeed arrested for investigation, but the inquiry did not stop there. The High Sparrow listened carefully to confessions, witnesses, rumors, and contradictions wherever they appeared. If queens demanded equal justice for others, then queens themselves could not stand beyond judgment. Why did Cersei trust Osney Kettleblack with a scheme so extraordinarily dangerous? She ordered him to seduce Queen Margaery and later confess the affair, expecting fabricated testimony to destroy the Tyrell alliance from within. Instead, under questioning by the faith, Osney confessed something entirely different. He admitted to sleeping with Cersei herself and described other crimes committed at her direction, including the murder of the previous High Septon. Whether every statement emerged freely or under intense spiritual pressure matters less than the result. The witness upon whom Cersei had built her strategy became the instrument of her own downfall. The High Sparrow moved with calm certainty rather than haste. Cersei was summoned before the faith and formally accused of adultery, incest, regicide, and other grave offenses. Readers immediately noticed the irony. Some accusations were entirely false, others were completely true. Her relationship with Jaime Lannister had indeed produced the royal children. She had committed adultery throughout her marriage to Robert, yet she had not murdered Joffrey, despite the suspicion surrounding his death. Martin deliberately creates this complicated mixture because it prevents the reader from treating the trial as either simple justice or simple persecution. Truth and falsehood arrive intertwined. One detail often escapes attention amid the larger drama. When Cersei enters confinement beneath the Great Sept, she expects political influence to secure her release quickly. Surely Kevin Lannister, Mace Tyrell, or members of the small council will pressure the faith. Surely Queen Regents cannot simply disappear into prison cells. Day after day passes with little change. The High Sparrow remains courteous but immovable. For perhaps the first time since becoming queen, Cersei confronts an opponent who cannot be bribed with offices, frightened by noble names, or persuaded through dynastic advantage. he serves a higher authority than earthly kings. Was the High Sparrow truly smarter than Cersei, or did he simply play a different game? That question lingers throughout these chapters. Cersei excelled at navigating ambition because she understood ambitious people instinctively. The High Sparrow sought neither castles nor coin nor titles. His strength came from moral legitimacy in the eyes of thousands of ordinary believers. Such power cannot easily be measured by armies or gold. Tywin Lannister might have recognized the danger immediately. Cersei saw only another political rival waiting to be manipulated. By the time she realized otherwise, the walls around her had already closed. The stone beneath the Great Sept feels colder than the polished floors of the Red Keep. The smell of incense replaces the scent of courtly perfumes, while distant prayers echo softly through narrow corridors where queens receive no special privilege. Somewhere above, King's Landing continues its endless bustle, merchants opening stalls and ships arriving across Blackwater Bay. Below those familiar streets, Cersei Lannister discovers that the game she mastered for so many years has changed without her noticing. The newest player upon the board does not fear lions, crowns, or ancient houses. He fears only the judgment of the gods. Why did Cersei, who had correctly identified so many genuine threats throughout her life, begin seeing enemies in nearly every shadow? This question sits at the heart of her chapters in A Feast for Crows. Readers who experienced earlier books through the eyes of Eddard Stark, Tyrion Lannister, Jaime Lannister, and Sansa Stark finally step inside Cersei's own thoughts. The surprise is not that she notices conspiracies. King's Landing truly is filled with conspiracies. The surprise is how difficult it has become for her to distinguish the real plots from those created by fear, grief, and the prophecy that has haunted her since childhood. Her imprisonment beneath the Great Sept strips away every layer of royal ceremony. The Queen Regent, who once commanded the King's Guard, now sleeps on rough straw. Servants no longer prepare scented baths or rich meals. Septas question her relentlessly, demanding confession after confession, while measuring every hesitation as evidence of guilt. The books linger on these details because humiliation itself becomes a weapon. Cersei had spent years believing dignity flowed naturally from rank. The faith demonstrates that rank can disappear almost overnight when public legitimacy vanishes with it. Why did she finally confess if she still denied many of the accusations? The answer reveals how carefully the High Sparrow understood human endurance. Cersei resisted for days, then weeks. Hunger weakened her. Isolation eroded certainty. Constant prayer, endless questioning, and the absence of familiar allies gradually narrowed her world until confession became the only visible path toward seeing Tommen again. Eventually, she admitted to adultery with Ser Osmond Kettleblack and other sins, while continuing to deny incest with Jaime and involvement in regicide. The confession was incomplete, but it proved sufficient for the High Sparrow to permit release under carefully defined conditions. One of Martin's most memorable sequences follows immediately afterward. Cersei agrees to perform a walk of atonement through the streets of King's Landing, traveling barefoot from the Great Sept of Belor to the Red Keep. Her hair is shorn, her body is stripped bare. Septas walk behind her chanting shame, while the people of the city gather to watch. The television adaptation amplifies this scene dramatically, but its emotional foundation already exists in the novels. Every stone beneath her feet Every insult from the crowd, every object thrown from windows, reminds her that political authority ultimately depends upon public belief as much as noble blood. Yet the crowd itself deserves closer attention. Not everyone watching hates the queen. Some stare in silence, others pity her. A few cheer enthusiastically, remembering taxes, hunger, or wartime suffering they associate with the Lannister regime. Martin consistently portrays the small folk as individuals rather than a single united voice. They respond according to personal memory, local hardship, and rumor. Cersei experiences the procession as universal condemnation because shame naturally magnifies hostile voices while diminishing quieter ones. Even here, perception and reality begin drifting further apart. Waiting at the end of that agonizing journey stands a towering, silent knight, unlike any other in Westeros. Sir Robert Strong, newly presented by Qyburn, appears clad completely in white armor, speaking no words and removing his helm before no one. Officially, Qyburn explains that severe wounds and sacred vows require his silence. Officially, he is simply another sworn brother of the Kingsguard, replacing the fallen Sir Aerys Oakheart. Almost no character fully believes the explanation. The enormous size of the knight, his unnatural endurance, and the mysterious disappearance of Sir Gregor Clegane after Qyburn's experiments invite obvious conclusions, though the books deliberately stop short of explicit confirmation. Cersei, however, asks remarkably few questions. She sees only the loyal champion she desperately needs. Why did Qyburn become one of the only advisors Cersei trusted completely? The answer reaches beyond gratitude. Throughout her reign, nearly every experienced counselor attempted to restrain her. Jon Arryn investigated her children. Tywin criticized her judgment. Kevan opposed her appointments. Pycelle questioned her decisions. Even Jaime increasingly refused to obey automatically. Qyburn alone offered solutions without moral lectures or political condescension. He never suggested patience when she demanded action. He never implied she lacked the ability to rule. In return, Cersei granted him extraordinary authority, eventually naming him Master of Whisperers, despite his expulsion from the Citadel years earlier. This appointment highlights an often overlooked truth about Cersei's intelligence. She understood the importance of information, at least as well as Varys or Littlefinger did. The office of Master of Whisperers had never simply collected gossip. It coordinated networks of informants, intercepted correspondence, tracked foreign envoys, and monitored the shifting loyalties of great houses. Qyburn inherited many of Varys's abandoned little birds, the orphan children who carried messages unnoticed through King's Landing's hidden passages. Cersei immediately recognized the value of preserving that network rather than dismantling it. Even while imprisoned, she never stopped thinking about intelligence gathering as the foundation of power. Was Varys truly gone from the board? Most people within the Red Keep believe so after Tyrion escaped across the Narrow Sea with Varys's assistance. The spider had vanished without explanation following Tywin's murder. Cersei accepted his disappearance as another fortunate consequence of recent events. Readers, however, know that Varys has not abandoned his long game. In the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, he secretly returns to murder Grandmaster Pycelle and Kevan Lannister, explaining that continued instability will better prepare the realm for the arrival of the young man presented as Aegon Targaryen, son of Prince Rhaegar. Cersei never sees this larger design unfolding beyond her immediate horizon. Another change quietly reshapes her relationship with Jaime. After losing his sword hand at the hands of Vargo Hoat's brave companions, Jaime begins questioning many of the assumptions that once defined his life. His journey with Brienne of Tarth softens certain judgments and deepens others. He increasingly seeks honor rather than reputation alone. Cersei expects the brother who always rescued her without hesitation. The man returning from captivity is no longer exactly that person. Their conversations grow strained. Affection remains, but certainty disappears. Without realizing it, Cersei is losing perhaps the one ally whose loyalty had once seemed beyond question. Why does this matter so much politically? Because Jaime had often served as the bridge between Cersei's emotional instincts and practical action. He rarely loved court intrigue, yet his presence offered stability simply by existing. When she faced Robert, Ned Stark, or Stannis Baratheon, Jaime represented unwavering support. Now he hesitates, questions orders, and sometimes refuses requests outright. Cersei interprets these changes as betrayal. Jaime experiences them as moral growth. Martin allows neither sibling to understand the other completely, making their gradual separation all the more painful. Beyond King's Landing, the wider world refuses to pause. Stannis Baratheon marches through the north after aiding the Night's Watch against Mance Rayder's wildling host beneath the wall. Daenerys Targaryen rules uneasily in Meereen, with Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion growing ever larger. Across the narrow sea, rumors spread concerning the Golden Company and a young prince claiming the name Aegon Targaryen. The Iron Throne remains the center of Westerosi politics, but it is no longer the center of the world's unfolding story. Cersei focuses almost entirely upon dangers inside the capital, while larger storms gather far beyond the horizon. As darkness settles once again over Blackwater Bay, the windows of the Red Keep glow with scattered candlelight, each flame marking another chamber where alliances are whispered into existence. Queen Cersei has regained her freedom, reclaimed a measure of authority, and surrounded herself with servants whose loyalty appears unquestionable. Yet the city has changed. While she struggled beneath the Great Sept, old friends have drifted away. Invisible enemies move beyond her sight. The game remains the same, but the board beneath her hands has become far larger than she realizes. Why do so many readers remember Cersei as foolish when the novels repeatedly show her making observations that turn out to be correct? This apparent contradiction deserves careful attention because it sits at the center of Martin's characterization. Cersei correctly senses that House Tyrell seeks greater influence over King Tommen. She correctly distrusts Petyr Baelish, even if she never understands the full extent of his schemes. She correctly recognizes that Varys never truly served the Lannisters. She also understands, long before many others, that power flows through information more reliably than through ceremony. Her problem is rarely that she identifies dangers. Her problem is deciding which danger matters most at any given moment. One striking example concerns the Tyrells. Lord Mace Tyrell constantly presses for greater authority within the government. Sir Loras Tyrell joins the Kingsguard and becomes one of Tommen's closest protectors. Margaery wins affection from both the court and the people. Paxter Redwine commands one of the greatest fleets in Westeros, while Randall Tarley possesses one of its finest military reputations. Taken together, these developments genuinely strengthen Reach influence inside King's Landing. Cersei notices every one of them. She is not inventing a conspiracy. She simply assumes that every increase in Tyrell prestige must inevitably lead to her own destruction. Her relationship with Margaery illustrates this perfectly. The younger queen laughs easily, enjoys hawking, rides confidently, and surrounds herself with cousins, including Eleanor, Maega, and Alla Tyrell. These young women fill the Red Keep with music, conversation, and a kind of effortless warmth that Cersei increasingly views with suspicion. In another life, they might have become companions. Under the weight of Maggie's prophecy, however, every smile appears calculated. Every shared conversation becomes evidence of hidden alliances. Fear narrows Cersei's interpretation of ordinary human behavior until coincidence itself begins looking like strategy. Why does prophecy possess such power over intelligent people throughout A Song of Ice and Fire? Martin rarely portrays prophecy as false. Instead, he portrays certainty about prophecy as dangerous. Prince Rhaegar believed ancient promises guided his family and reshaped his entire life around those beliefs. Melisandre repeatedly sees authentic visions in the flames while misunderstanding their meaning. Daenerys receives genuine glimpses inside the House of the Undying without immediately grasping their significance. Cersei belongs within this same pattern. She never doubts that Maggie spoke the truth. Consequently, every future decision becomes an attempt either to outrun destiny or strike first against it. The prophecy does not eliminate free will, it quietly influences every exercise of it. Another revealing contrast appears when comparing Cersei with Varys. Both appreciate the immense value of information. Both cultivate informants. Both understand that whispers often matter more than swords. Yet Varys consistently separates personal feeling from long-term objectives. Whether readers accept his stated devotion to the realm or believe his true loyalty belongs solely to House Targaryen, he rarely allows anger to redirect strategy. Cersei cannot achieve that same distance. An insult delivered during court may linger in her memory for years. A perceived slight often receives as much attention as an advancing army. Her intelligence remains sharp. Her priorities gradually become distorted. The same distinction explains her conflict with Jaime. When Jaime refuses to abandon River Run immediately after receiving Cersei's desperate letter begging for rescue from the Faith, many readers interpret his silence as emotional betrayal. The moment carries enormous weight because it demonstrates how far both twins have traveled from childhood. Jaime has begun defining honor independently rather than borrowing his sister's judgments. He burns the letter without answering. In the books, this quiet act speaks more loudly than a battlefield confrontation. The bond that once seemed unbreakable has finally developed visible fractures. Why did Jaime change while Cersei remained trapped inside older patterns? His captivity after the Whispering Wood, the loss of his sword hand, and his long journey with Brienne of Tarth forced him to question the identity he had carried for decades. Stripped of his greatest skill, he rebuilt himself around different values. Cersei experienced loss as well. Robert, Joffrey, Tywin, and her political authority, but interpreted each setback primarily as evidence that enemies surrounded her. Jaime looked inward before judging the world. Cersei looked outward first. Their paths slowly diverged because suffering transformed each twin in opposite directions. Outside the capital, events continue unfolding with remarkable speed. Jon Snow has been elected the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch after the deaths of Jeor Mormont and Qhorin Halfhand's sacrifice beyond the Wall. Stannis Baratheon campaigns in the north after defeating Mance Rayder's host beneath Castle Black, seeking support from northern houses including House Mormont, House Karstark, and House Umber. Across the Narrow Sea, Daenerys struggles to govern Meereen while facing the Sons of the Harpy and growing instability in Slaver's Bay. None of these developments occupies much of Cersei's attention. The world has become too large for any ruler to observe completely, yet she increasingly believes every decisive struggle still centers upon King's Landing. Then there is the matter of Kevan Lannister. After years of frustration with Cersei's decisions, Kevan reluctantly returns to government following her imprisonment, largely because the realm desperately requires experienced administration. His chapters reveal a striking contrast with his niece. He works patiently with Mace Tyrell rather than provoking needless conflict. He restores practical cooperation within the small council. He recognizes Tommen's gentle nature and attempts to shield the young king from factional struggles. Kevan lacks Tywin's brilliance, yet he possesses something equally valuable during times of crisis: steadiness. Why does Varys choose this precise moment to emerge from hiding? The epilogue of A Dance with Dragons provides one of the series' most chilling revelations. Hidden inside the Red Keep, Varys murders Grandmaster Pycelle with crossbow bolts before confronting Kevan Lannister privately. He explains that Kevan has become too competent. Peace is returning too quickly. Cooperation between Lannisters and Tyrells threatens plans carefully nurtured across many years. The realm, Varys insists, must remain divided if the young man presented as Aegon Targaryen is to reclaim the Iron Throne successfully. It is one of the rare occasions when Martin allows readers to glimpse the architect behind several of the saga's longest-running mysteries. This scene also transforms our understanding of Cersei. For all her flaws, she never perceived the full scale of the game unfolding around her because almost no one did. She believed Littlefinger dangerous, correct. She believed Varys dangerous, correct again. What she never imagined was that these men pursued objectives extending beyond immediate control of the small council or influence over Tommen. While she fought to preserve Lannister authority inside King's Landing, others quietly prepared to reshape the political map of the entire continent. The candle in the Tower of the Hand burns lower now, its flame reflecting softly against polished stone worn smooth by generations of rulers. Beyond the windows, Blackwater Bay remains calm, giving no hint that fleets, dragons, exiled princes, and ancient threats continue moving toward Westeros from every direction. Queen Cersei still believes the greatest contest is unfolding inside the Red Keep. The truth, known only to you and a handful of hidden players, is gentler and far more unsettling. The game she mastered so well has already expanded beyond the walls she spent her life defending. Why does Cersei Lannister inspire such radically different judgments among readers? Some describe her as one of the most intelligent political figures in Westeros, a woman trapped inside a society unwilling to grant her the authority freely offered to men of equal ambition. Others argue that she destroyed nearly every advantage House Lannister possessed through suspicion, vanity, and impulsive decisions. The remarkable achievement of George R. Martin is that both readings find genuine support within the text. Cersei is neither secretly flawless nor secretly foolish. She is brilliant in ways many characters never appreciate, yet blind in ways she herself can never fully recognize. To understand her, you must hold both truths at once. Consider the record she leaves behind. She survives nearly 2 decades of marriage to Robert Baratheon while successfully concealing the true parentage of 3 royal children. She recognizes the ambitions of the Tyrells almost immediately after their arrival at court. She understands that information, not ceremony, determines political power inside King's Landing. She identifies Petyr Baelish and Varys as profoundly dangerous long before their greatest schemes become visible to others. She repeatedly grasps the strategic value of decisive action when more hesitant rulers remain trapped by indecision. These are not accidental achievements. They require perception, memory, patience, and the willingness to think several moves ahead. Yet beside every success stands another decision pulling in the opposite direction. She empowers the faith militant without appreciating that religious legitimacy cannot be controlled like hired swords. She alienates Kevan Lannister, one of the most reliable administrators available to House Lannister after Tywin's death. She surrounds herself with flatterers such as the Kettleblacks, while distrusting experienced advisors capable of correcting mistakes before they grow dangerous. She allows prophecy to reshape practical judgment until ordinary political rivalry appears inseparable from supernatural destiny. None of these failures erase her intelligence. They demonstrate how intelligence itself can become distorted when filtered through fear. Why does Tywin continue to dominate discussions about political genius while Cersei so often becomes a warning instead? One reason is that history favors visible victories. Tywin wins wars, destroys rebellious houses, and restores Lannister prestige after the humiliation of Lord Tytos. His achievements leave castles conquered, treaties signed, and enemies defeated. Cersei operates within narrower spaces. She protects secrets, influences conversations, guides royal decisions, and survives crises that unfold behind closed doors. Political history often remembers armies more easily than whispered negotiations. Martin quietly reminds us that unseen victories may be just as decisive, even if they receive fewer songs. The comparison with Tyrion proves equally revealing. Tyrion consistently receives admiration for clever improvisation. His defense of King's Landing during the Blackwater, his exposure of Pycelle through the Myrcella marriage deception, and his verbal dexterity all display undeniable brilliance. Cersei's strengths emerge differently. She excels at recognizing patterns in human behavior, sensing threats before they become obvious, and understanding how symbols of authority influence perception. Tyrion frequently solves immediate problems. Cersei thinks instinctively about preserving dynastic control. Neither sibling inherits Tywin's mind completely. Together, they reflect different fragments of it. Another illuminating comparison involves Olenna Tyrell, The Queen of Thorns rarely commands armies personally or occupies the Iron Throne, yet she shapes events through conversation, reputation, and careful alliances. Unlike Cersei, Olenna usually separates personal pride from political necessity. If one marriage fails, she pursues another. If one alliance weakens, she cultivates the next. Cersei often treats political defeat as personal humiliation. Olenna treats it as a temporary inconvenience requiring another move. Their contrasting temperaments explain why each woman succeeds where the other struggles. What then of Littlefinger? Peter Baelish perhaps comes closest to embodying pure political calculation within the novels. Born to only modest noble status on the Fingers, he rises through financial administration, manipulation, and relentless opportunism until he becomes Lord Paramount of the Trident and Lord of Harrenhal. Cersei distrusts him repeatedly and with good reason. Yet she never fully grasps the scale of his ambitions because they extend beyond ordinary court rivalry. Littlefinger does not merely wish to influence kings, he wishes to redesign the political landscape itself. In this respect, he resembles Varys more than any of the great lords. Martin's books also encourage one final comparison with Ned Stark. On the surface, Ned and Cersei appear complete opposites. Honor stands against pragmatism. Mercy stands against ruthlessness. Winterfell stands against King's Landing. Yet each character possesses a quality the other lacks. Ned inspires lasting loyalty that survives his death, while Cersei understands practical mechanisms of power that Ned consistently underestimates. If either had possessed even a portion of the other's strengths, the history of Westeros might have unfolded very differently. Their confrontation in A Game of Thrones remains so compelling because both see genuine truths that the other cannot accept. Why has the television adaptation influenced public opinion about Cersei so strongly? The answer lies partly in chronology. In the novels currently published, her story pauses before trial by combat, with many central questions unresolved. The adaptation continues far beyond that point, presenting later victories, later defeats, and an ending unique to the television narrative. Those developments often shape modern discussions more than Martin's unfinished text. For this reason, returning to the books reveals a Cersei who remains more ambiguous, more psychologically layered, and far less easily summarized than either hero or villain. There is also a quieter lesson hidden beneath her story. Martin repeatedly explores the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence recognizes patterns, solves puzzles, remembers details, and anticipates consequences. Wisdom decides which consequences deserve attention and which fears deserve dismissal. Cersei possesses the first gift in abundance. The second often slips beyond her grasp, especially once grief and prophecy begin reinforcing one another. This distinction explains why so many of her plans begin brilliantly before gradually collapsing beneath assumptions she never questions. As midnight settles once more across King's Landing, the Tower of the Hand stands silent above the sleeping city. The candle beside the window has burned almost to its base, throwing a smaller circle of light than it did when this story began. Outside, Blackwater Bay reflects the stars with perfect calm, indifferent to lions, dragons, wolves, and stags alike. Looking back across Cersei Lannister's life, you are left with a quieter conclusion than simple praise or condemnation. She understood the game better than most, whoever played it. What she never fully understood was herself. Why does Cersei's story remain unfinished while so many readers speak about her as though every answer is already known? The books leave her at one of the most uncertain moments of her life. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, she has completed her walk of atonement, regained partial freedom, restored a measure of influence over young King Tommen, and placed enormous faith in Sir Robert Strong as her champion, yet her formal trial before the faith has not occurred. Varys has quietly removed Kevan Lannister and Grand Maester Pycelle from the board. Across the narrow sea, another claimant advances toward Westeros. The final judgment on Cersei Lannister has not yet been written, and that uncertainty shapes how we should understand everything that came before. The contrast between the published novels and the television adaptation becomes especially important here. In the adaptation, Cersei ultimately destroys the Great Sept of Baelor with hidden wildfire, eliminates the Faith leadership, much of House Tyrell, and many of her remaining political rivals in one catastrophic explosion before eventually ruling as queen in her own right. None of these events has yet taken place in Martin's published books. Wildfire certainly exists beneath King's Landing. King Aerys II ordered enormous caches hidden throughout the city during his final years, and both Tyrion and Jaime learn of them. Readers therefore speculate endlessly about whether those forgotten stores will eventually play another decisive role. At present, however, such conclusions remain theory rather than canon. Why does wildfire continue haunting the story long after the Mad King's death? Jaime's memories provide one answer. As a young knight of the King's Guard, he stood beside Aerys II while the king repeatedly demanded, "Burn them all." Hidden jars of wildfire had been placed beneath streets, towers, and even parts of the Red Keep by the Alchemists' Guild. Jaime killed Rossart, chief of the Pyromancers, before slaying Aerys himself, preventing the immediate destruction of King's Landing. Yet not every cache was recovered afterward. During the Battle of the Blackwater, Tyrion employs newly manufactured wildfire against Stannis' fleet, reminding readers that the substance remains both a weapon and a lingering threat. Cersei's fascination with decisive, overwhelming solutions naturally invites comparisons to Aerys, though Martin has not confirmed that their paths will ultimately converge. There is another comparison that deserves equal attention. Cersei often believes she is becoming another Tywin Lannister, but in several crucial respects, she resembles Robert Baratheon more closely than she would ever admit. Both rely heavily on loyal companions while gradually dismissing uncomfortable advice. Both assume their authority will naturally compel obedience. Both underestimate the accumulation of financial, political, and social pressures beneath the surface of their reigns. Robert inherited a kingdom exhausted by rebellion. Cersei inherits one exhausted by civil war. Neither fully recognizes how difficult rebuilding can be once trust has been broken. At the same time, reducing Cersei to inherited flaws misses much of Martin's intention. Few women in Westeros ever receive opportunities equal to those routinely granted men. Cersei watches Jaime receive martial training, admiration, and freedom simply because he is male, despite believing herself equally capable of leadership. She remembers wishing as a child that she had been born a son. Even Tywin, who values competence above almost everything else, rarely imagines placing her at the center of dynastic succession. These experiences genuinely shape her worldview. They help explain, though never excuse, the fierce determination with which she later grasps every fragment of authority available to her. Why then do readers continue arguing that she was the smartest player in the game? The strongest case rests not upon her victories alone, but upon the questions she asked before anyone else. She understood that appearances could hide illegitimacy because she herself created the greatest hidden succession crisis in Westerosi history. She recognized that smiling allies might pursue competing ambitions long before those ambitions became public. She appreciated that symbols, the Iron Throne, the crown, the white cloaks of the King's Guard, the approval of the faith, the affection of the small folk, possessed tangible political value rather than existing merely for ceremony. Many rulers learned these lessons only after disaster struck. Cersei knew them instinctively. The strongest argument against the claim is equally compelling. Truly great political thinkers know when to revise their assumptions. Tywin changed strategy after defeats. Tyrion adapted constantly to unexpected developments. Varys patiently abandoned plans years in the making whenever circumstances demanded new approaches. Cersei struggled to reconsider first impressions. Once she labeled someone an enemy, evidence rarely softened that judgment. Once Maggie's prophecy convinced her that a younger queen would cast her down, nearly every event reinforced the same conclusion regardless of alternative explanations. Intelligence without flexibility gradually hardens into certainty, and certainty often blinds even remarkable minds. One subtle detail from the novels captures this transformation beautifully. Throughout her point of view chapters, Cersei repeatedly interprets silence as evidence. If a lord says little, he must be hiding something. If a servant hesitates, she must be concealing betrayal. If allies exchange glances, they must already share secret plans. Sometimes she is correct, sometimes she is entirely mistaken. The tragedy lies in the fact that both situations feel identical to her. Once every coincidence appears meaningful, separating genuine warning from ordinary chance becomes nearly impossible. Martin has always resisted dividing his characters into heroes and villains. Jaime Lannister begins the series by pushing Bran Stark from a tower before later emerging as one of its most reflective figures. Theon Greyjoy betrays Winterfell before enduring extraordinary suffering and seeking redemption. Sandor Clegane commits terrible acts while revealing surprising compassion beneath his bitterness. Cersei belongs within this same literary tradition, though her path bends in a different direction. Rather than moving steadily toward redemption or corruption, she reveals how brilliance and blindness can coexist inside one person without ever canceling each other out. There is one final mystery worth carrying into the unwritten pages of The Winds of Winter. Will Cersei ultimately become the architect of House Lannister's final ruin, or will history remember her as the last lion still standing while others fall around her? The books deliberately leave room for both possibilities. Tommen still lives. Myrcella remains in Dorne after the failed attempt to crown her under Dornish succession customs. Jaime rides through the Riverlands. After following Brienne toward Lady Stoneheart, Tyrion travels east. Daenerys commands dragons. Young Aegon lands in the Stormlands. Every thread continues moving toward a meeting point not yet revealed. The candle that welcomed you at the beginning of this journey has almost burned away completely. Its small flame flickers beside the narrow window overlooking King's Landing, casting long shadows across empty chairs where hands, queens, and kings once argued over the fate of the 7 kingdoms. Beyond the walls, the city sleeps, much as it did when we first entered these chambers, unaware that history is still quietly unfolding beyond the edge of every torchlit street. Cersei Lannister remains where Martin left her, neither fully defeated nor fully victorious, still dangerous, still perceptive, still flawed, and still waiting for the next move in a game she spent her entire life trying to master. Why does the candle still matter after everything we have seen? At the beginning of this journey, it burned brightly beside a window in the Tower of the Hand, casting steady light across a city that believed its rulers controlled its future. Now only a small flame remains, wavering gently as the night wind slips through ancient stone. Nothing about King's Landing appears unusual from this height. The towers still rise above Aegon's high hill. The Blackwater Rush still carries ships toward the sea. Somewhere beyond the city gates, ravens continue flying between castles with messages that will decide the fate of kingdoms. Yet if these stories have taught us anything, it is that the greatest changes in Westeros almost never begin with armies marching beneath banners. They begin with quiet decisions made in rooms like this one. Cersei Lannister's life is filled with paradoxes that refuse simple answers. She loved her children fiercely, yet many of the choices meant to protect them ultimately placed them in greater danger. She admired Tywin Lannister above every other ruler, yet gradually abandoned many of the habits that made him effective. She distrusted ambitious rivals with remarkable accuracy, while repeatedly placing faith in flatterers who reflected only her own opinions. She understood that appearances could deceive, then spent years deceived by appearances created inside her own mind. These contradictions do not weaken her story. They are the story. If we judge only outcomes, it becomes easy to declare that Cersei failed. House Lannister entered the War of the Five Kings as the wealthiest and most powerful family in Westeros, allied with the Iron Throne itself. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, Tywin is dead, Joffrey is dead, Keevan is dead, Pycelle is dead, Jaime has grown distant, the Faith challenges royal authority, and enemies gather on every frontier. Such a balance sheet appears unforgiving. Yet history rarely measures intelligence by victory alone. Many brilliant commanders lose wars because circumstances shift beyond their control. Many mediocre rulers inherit peace and receive credit they never truly earned. Martin consistently resists reducing human lives to final scores. Why does Cersei continue attracting sympathy, even after committing acts many readers find unforgivable? Part of the answer lies in perspective. Once Martin grants us her point of view, she ceases to exist merely as another character opposing the protagonists. We experience her fears directly. We witness memories of Joanna Lannister, hear the echo of Maggie's prophecy, and watch her struggle beneath the expectations imposed by family, gender, and dynasty. None of this erases responsibility. It does something more interesting. It reminds us that every person inside these books believes they are acting for reasons that make sense, even when those reasons lead toward catastrophe. This is one of the defining qualities of A Song of Ice and Fire. The saga rarely asks who deserves victory. Instead, it asks what power demands from those who seek it. Eddard Stark sacrifices political advantage rather than betray his honor. Stannis Baratheon sacrifices affection in pursuit of lawful succession. Daenerys Targaryen sacrifices certainty while attempting to rule justly in lands she scarcely understands. Tyrion sacrifices belonging after years of rejection. Cersei sacrifices trust. Each exchange shapes a different destiny. None leaves its owner unchanged. Another question lingers softly beneath all the others. Was Cersei truly playing the same game as everyone else? Tywin measured success through the survival of House Lannister. Varys speaks of serving the realm, whether readers believe him or not. Littlefinger pursues advancement without visible limits. The High Sparrow seeks spiritual authority rooted in the faith. Cersei increasingly plays against prophecy itself. She believes she is resisting rivals made of flesh and blood, but much of her energy flows toward defeating words spoken decades earlier by an old woman living in a lonely hut. In that sense, her greatest opponent is invisible from the very beginning. There is a quiet sadness hidden inside that realization. Had Maggie the Frog never spoken those prophecies, would Cersei have greeted Marguerite Tyrell differently? Would she have viewed every younger noblewoman with less suspicion? Would Tommen have experienced a gentler court? Martin never answers these questions because they belong to one of the oldest themes in literature. Does knowledge of the future grant freedom, or does it quietly imprison those who believe it? Throughout the novels, every major prophecy seems to carry this same uncertainty. The future remains unwritten, yet those convinced they know it often become the instruments of its arrival. The books themselves also invite restraint. We know that The Winds of Winter remains unpublished. We know that Cersei's trial, the fate of King Tommen, the ambitions of young Aegon, the advance of Daenerys Targaryen, the struggle beyond the wall, and countless other threads still await resolution in Martin's intended narrative. Any confident claim about Cersei's ultimate destiny moves beyond established canon into prediction. Some fan theories imagine her dying by Jaime's hand because the Valyrian word Valonqar means little brother, while others suggest Tyrion better fits the prophecy. Still others argue Martin intends an entirely different fulfillment that readers have overlooked. For now, they remain theories, intriguing precisely because the books leave room for them. So was Cersei the smartest player in the Game of Thrones? The answer depends upon what you believe intelligence truly means. If intelligence is recognizing danger before others do, she stands among the greatest political minds in Westeros. If intelligence is preserving power across generations, her record becomes far less certain. If intelligence includes understanding oneself as clearly as one understands one's enemies, then her story becomes a caution rather than a triumph. Martin never asks us to choose only one definition. He allows them to exist together just as they so often do in real lives. The candle finally reaches the end of its wick. Its last light trembles across the carved wooden table, over faded maps of the Seven Kingdoms, across sealed letters waiting for hands that may never return. Outside, King's Landing sleeps beneath the same stars that shone when we first entered this quiet chamber. The sea breeze still carries the scent of salt through the narrow window, and somewhere below, the city continues dreaming of kings, queens, victories, and betrayals. Long after the flame disappears into darkness, one thought remains gently glowing in the silence. Cersei Lannister did not lose because she lacked intelligence. She lost because even the sharpest mind in Westeros cannot always see the deepest truths hidden within itself. When you spend enough time walking beside Cersei Lannister, the easy judgments begin to fade. She is neither the monster remembered by her enemies, nor the misunderstood genius imagined by her greatest admirers. George R.R. Martin rarely writes people who can be explained with a single sentence, and Cersei may be one of his clearest reminders that intelligence, courage, fear, pride, and love can all exist inside the same heart without ever settling into harmony. You have watched her make decisions that preserved a dynasty for years, and others that quietly weakened it from within. That is not a contradiction. It is simply the way power behaves in Martin's world, where every victory carries the seed of another struggle, and every clever solution creates a new problem waiting just beyond the horizon. Perhaps that is why the Iron Throne itself feels less like a prize than a mirror. It reflects whatever the ruler brings before it. Robert Baratheon placed upon it the exhaustion that followed war. Tywin Lannister saw a machine that required discipline above affection. Tyrion searched for practical answers hidden beneath impossible circumstances. Cersei saw a fortress that had to be defended against enemies seen and unseen, until eventually she could no longer tell which dangers were approaching from the world outside and which had taken root inside her own thoughts. The throne did not transform these people into someone else. It revealed what had always been waiting beneath their crowns. There is also a quieter truth carried through every page of A Song of Ice and Fire. The greatest forces shaping history are often invisible while they are happening. A careless word spoken by an old woman in childhood, a marriage accepted for politics rather than love, a letter delayed by winter roads, a secret protected for 15 years, a king choosing one more cup of wine before riding into the forest. Armies march only after countless smaller choices have already prepared the road beneath their feet. Martin fills his world with dragons, ancient magic, and legendary swords, yet he never allows us to forget that kingdoms often rise or fall because ordinary human hearts remain wonderfully, painfully imperfect. As you leave these halls, it becomes easier to understand why the story of Cersei Lannister refuses to settle into a simple lesson. She reminds you that wisdom is not merely seeing farther than others. It is also knowing when to question your own certainty. Many characters in these books are defeated by stronger armies or sharper blades. Cersei's greatest struggle is quieter than that. She spends her life learning how to read everyone around her, while never fully learning how to read herself. There is a sadness in that realization, but there is also something deeply human, and perhaps that is why her story lingers long after individual battles and crowns have faded from memory. Now the city has fallen silent again. The candle beside the narrow window has burned almost completely away, leaving only a small circle of fading light upon the old wooden table. Beyond the glass, Blackwater Bay lies calm beneath the stars, the towers of the Red Keep, standing watch, as they have through kings, queens, victories, betrayals, and the slow turning of countless seasons. You can almost hear the distant wind moving along the castle walls, carrying away the last echoes of whispered counsels and impossible ambitions. And somewhere in that quiet darkness, where our journey first began, the final ember flickers once before surrendering gently to the night.